YouTube, the one question I can always rely on getting asked every time I release a design is, what font is that? Where'd you get your font from? Font. It's not even a font, it's a typeface. So I'm going to show you that you can get one font for free and you can make an entire poster with it with no trouble at all. So let me walk you through how I've created this poster design, and let's just jump straight in. The typeface I'm going to be using is called Thunder. See, I found this maybe about a year ago and I've used it so much since because it's so versatile. It's great for sort of like headlines on posters. You can see here how many weights it has. It's high contrast and low contrast, as you can see here. And the best bit of it all is that it's free. So I'll link it in the description for you to use yourself, but I'm just going to jump straight into Photoshop now. Okay, so moving into Photoshop here, this is the poster outcome I created using just Thunder as a typeface. I've got the main bold type as the headline, and I'm coming down here and you've got a lower weight, maybe around a light or medium, creating the paragraphs. There's a nice kind of like half-tony texture over it, and you can see the kind of masking that's gone on here with the lightning coming in and out of the text. So let me just start and walk you through how I've done this. First step, new canvas, 3840 by 4800 pixels, standard for my poster design work. So I'm going to use grid lines. This is kind of like brutalist design, and it's all organized around a set margin. So if I come up to view, guides, new guide layout. So now this is the preset I've used. The reason I determined this is because I wanted 4 copies of the word Thunder, and then I still wanted enough of a row to put paragraph text in. So what I've done is I've added quite a lot of rows just so I can balance that out when we come to it. So 8's good here, and then 4 columns. Now I'm going to type in Thunder, and I'm using the black low contrast weight, as you can see here. Now I'm going to scale this until it reaches both side margins. Okay, now I'm going to assure that this is centered using the align tools at the top, and then drag it up to the top margin, holding shift. Let me just make sure that that's perfectly placed in there. Just use the arrow keys to adjust that. I'm just going to use Command J just to duplicate it down, and then hold shift and drag this. And now I'm going to do this 4 times. Don't worry about the gaps in between because we're going to use the align tools. So I'm now going to align the bottom one where I want it to be. So if I just use the arrow keys here to make sure it's on the margin. And now what I will do is I'll hold shift on each of these layers, selecting the top and the bottom one. Then I'm going to come up to these 3 dots up here, and I'm going to use the distribute spacing tool. So this is the distribute vertically, and it's going to make sure that they're evenly spaced. So you can see now the gaps in between are all perfectly sized. Once I had the headlines in place, I thought of using an image to mask over it, as it's quite a bold typeface. There's very little like negative space in here, so if you were to put an image over it, the majority of it would shine through. So I found an image online of Thunder. I'm just going to drag that in. Now this is the photo I was going to use, and my main thinking here is that I wanted this thunder strike, or this lightning strike, to come into the bottom corner of the canvas here. So that's what I'm going to consider when I'm moving the image. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. So I'm just going to make it stretch up to the edge of the margins, and I'm probably going to place it about here. So now to mask this, it's very simple. I'm going to hold Command over the little T icon on every text layer. But I'm going to hold Shift while I do it so it selects all of them. So that if I Command click on this T, and then I hold Command and Shift and click on the next one, it's going to outline all of them collectively. And then at this point, once I have the image selected, I just press mask. Now you can see, works really well overlaid here as there is so much area within the actual typeface. The next step I wanted is that I wanted the remainder of the lightning strike to shine into the actual corner of the page. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an exclusion layer by duplicating this image, and now I'm going to select the mask. Now with the mask selected, I just do Command and I to invert the mask, and you can see now that it is showing on the outside. So if I hide the layer below, it's now only showing the image over the white space. Now a simple method to use here is I'm going to select the layer, come over to layer modes, and I'm going to select exclusion. Make sure that this other layer is still visible. And I can see it kind of creates this kind of pinky tone, which is the opposite of the blue. I just want this kind of area down here to show the lightning strike, and that's all. So I'm going to select the mask layer, and I'm going to get my brush by pressing B. And I'm going to make sure that the black color is selected as the foreground. And with my brush, it's already quite big here, so I'm just going to bring it down using the square brackets. I'm just going to drag this over the background. I can see here it blends almost perfectly. If you can see the thunder strike the entire way through into the negative space on the page as well. Now moving on to the paragraph text, this is where the margins that we created at the start are going to come in handy. So we're going to use these squares as the text box areas just to make sure that they are all perfectly spaced. See, now I've already pasted these in just to save me typing them out again. But simply, I'm going to drag a square in each of these columns, and then I can paste my text in here and format it from there. If you want to format them all together, make sure you've got all of the layers selected. So I'm going to show you here, this typeface I'm using it's Thunder, medium, low contrast. See, I told you I'm only going to use 2 weights. Now, a special feature I added with this is that when I come onto the character tab here, I wanted to make sure that on all 3 of these paragraphs, the tracking was a bit higher than 0, because it's quite a narrow typeface. You can see that if I zoom out, it's a lot harder to read, but if I was to increase the tracking to maybe 30 or 40, it adds a little bit more space between each letter so that it's a bit more feasible. And now I wanted to justify these on both sides. So if I come onto the paragraph tab here and I want to select this justify all button. There you go. Now this is kind of more like a newspaper editorial look. Now the last shape feature I wanted to add was that you can see on this original I have these kind of triangles here. It's almost kind of meant to represent an abstract piece of lightning, but very simple to create. Just going to come over to the rectangle tool here, select triangle, make sure my grid lines are up, and then just hold shift, drawing some triangles. Going to make sure they are all facing right, and then simply duplicate and drag. I'm going to do 4 for each, and now once I've got 4, I'm going to group them together, duplicate this, drag across and raise up. Now I'm just going to repeat this just inconsistently, drag these across maybe a little bit lower. You kind of want to make it just a bit of an abstract pattern. Okay, so now these are done. Just so I can make them all perfectly aligned, I'm just going to highlight them all, make sure all the groups are selected here. Yep, and then I'm going to just drag this up to the margin line just to make sure. Okay, now we can move on to the coloring steps, but I'm just going to group these all into one folder just for safe keeps. Name that triangle. Right, now with this main body of the poster being done, all I'm going to move on to now is kind of texturing and coloring. So I wanted to create kind of like a bit of a vibrant color scheme here. So I'm going to come and add a gradient map down here in the adjustments panel. Make sure that this gradient icon selected and then select this bar. And I've got a whole bunch of gradient presets, but the one I'm going to be using is this selection here. So now with this selected, I'm just going to adjust the slider slightly just so I can get the contrast right. So now I want a good bit of contrast between the dark ends and the light ends. So the darker colors on the left-hand side, if you drag them more towards the middle, you can see more darker areas will appear. Now I'm just going to drag these across, get a bit more red in the body here, move the yellow to increase the contrast. And you can see you can play around with these for as long as you want. It just helps to create a little bit more contrast between the colors. Let's make sure that the white isn't fully dragged in. Okay, now I've just noticed that I've got the original text showing, so I'm just going to hide that here. Now with this color selected, you can see that in the original I've got this kind of background color going on here. You can see this red in the corner. So what I've done to create this is I have swapped around the mask layers. So I'm just going to drag this one below so that the text mask is on top. And then what I'm going to do is select this lower mask, press B for my brush tool, and I'm just going to draw in a section up here. Now you could do this inconsistently, like if you were to get a textured brush and just sort of dab it across, you can see it could create a nice interesting effect, which I'll show you here. So for example, if I selected this brush, made this a lot bigger and use the white brush reveal tool, you can see these kind of like splats of color come in. There's a lot of opportunity you can do with masks like this, but I'm just going to keep it to a soft brush for the moment. So using quite a big one just to get it a little bit more evenly spread. Just going to drag across that top corner. There we go. Now it helps just to add a little bit more contrast and color into the piece. And now moving on now, we're just going to go into the texture. Now my first step when it comes into texturing is always using some sort of displacement method to create the distressed outlines on everything in there. So the first step I'm going to do for that is create a new combined layer. So if I use Command, Option, Shift and E, that's going to create a new layer combining all layers currently visible. I'm just going to name this Displace and I'm going to convert it to a smart object. Now, the reason I convert it to a smart object is so I can adjust all of the values that I create on it. So I'll come out to Filter now, Distort, and Displace. Now I'm going to set the scale on each to about 20. It's kind of like a mid-range effect. Now with the scale set, I'm going to come and select the image file. So this is the film dust texture, and you can see here in the preview, it's just a simple kind of black overlay with these white film scratch and dust marks around the outside. So now I've saved this as a PSD file to use, and I'm going to link it in the description to get it for yourself. It's just a free pack, and now I'm going to use Open here. Now this is a great displacement layer because it's very subtle in what it does. Just on the outside of all the letters here, you can see it's like a really nice and consistent splat and dust and kind of scratchy texture. Now it's great for everything grunge, everything brutalist. Really nice effect up here. And then whenever you displace something, you need to just readjust it slightly to where it's moved. So I'm going to use the arrow keys just to shift them back into the grid lines. Now here I can add in the texture layer. So the first one I'm going to paste in is this paper cut texture by Design Syndrome. So this is a great texture. You can see these scratches across here. Really, really nice texture. I'm going to drop the opacity of that to about 80%. And now with this complete, I'm just going to add some noise onto the displace layer by coming out to Filter, Noise, Add Noise. I'm going to put it around 8. Now this is great that it's already on this layer because of course I can come down onto the smart objects and I can double click it to adjust it again. But overall that is the finished piece using just one typeface. Now it can prove to you that you don't need an elaborate font book to try and create some good poster work. There's so many tools that you can work with around that to create something great. So you can see all of these little details here. The color works really well with the piece, the paper, and then the displacement just tops it all off. And there we go, that is the final work. And if you made it to the end, you're a legend. Thank you so much. I do appreciate it, and I hope that I can be helpful to you in one way or another. If you want more content like this, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you get notified when I upload, and I'll see you again very soon.